speaker coming from afar, but I caught him because he was on vacation in BC, and I said, you've got to come here and give us an overview of what you're doing at ESO, my ex-employer. So Lars and I used to be colleagues.
Partners in crime.
Partners in crime. In some ways, not really work in the same area, but we've certainly seen each other for quite a while. And we both continued our own paths, respectively. And now Lars is the head of the outreach department in the European Southern Observatory, which he's going to introduce to you shortly. Lars has been doing that kind of work for quite a while, indeed. And even when I was still there, he was already doing that kind of work. In the meantime, he's been very prolific in terms of his actions and activities. He's written several books on science outreach. And I don't think he brought any with him.
I did.
You did?
That's a surprise.
So maybe we can have a particular sale with signatures from the author. All right, without further ado, I will let Lars introduce you his trade, and hopefully he'll have good lessons for all of us as we also venture into science outreach to the world public. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, so I traveled far to come here across this Salish Sea, and actually I always enjoyed the ocean. I dive. I started not in astronomy but in geophysics, and then I got caught by the astronomy stuff. So got sidetracked away from oceanography, glaciology, and all that. Ended up in astronomy. So I have a degree in astronomy, and I'm going to cram as much as I possibly can into the next 45 minutes. So if you fall asleep, that's fine, no problem. But I think every one of you can probably latch on to something that I have in my presentation, and you can ask as many questions as you want afterwards. So briefly about ESO, I'm going to show you a lot of slides very quickly. So we are a world-leading astronomy organization. We're intergovernmental as opposed to you, which is more national. We have 16 member states since a few weeks. We have also Ireland. We are partnering with Australia. Our telescopes are in Chile, so it's quite a lot of countries that we have to deal with, giving us some special, let's say, obligations to those member states. It also gives us an incredible stability in terms of funding, whereas you, like some, I would say many organizations in other countries, including the US, you have a very tightly bound loop to the funding, and what you do today have a real impact on the funding level next year. We're free of those reins in a sense because our funding just continues. If we do badly one year, it just continues. Of course, that's again also an obligation, but it gives us a great stability which helps us build megastructures. So we have 3 observing sites. This is a picture of our headquarters, which is in Germany. This is where I work. I'm originally Danish, just outside Munich. And this is what we do. So unlike you guys, we are not looking down, we're looking up at the stars and galaxies. What this illustrates is the electromagnetic spectrum, and the brown is where the rays from space can't reach the ground. So basically we have the visible area where you can observe up from the ground, and in the radio area at the longer wavelengths where you can also observe up, and a little bit in the infrared here and there. But by and large you have to go to space to see the whole electromagnetic spectrum. On the ground we can do certain things, and of course we use those to the best we possibly can. This is the money shot. So this is where we kind of get our funding. This is the number of publications done with data from ESO telescopes. Around 1,000 a year. We are the thick bar at the top. And then we have compared ourselves with certain other telescopes. HST is Hubble, which I think many of you will know, and then you have some other ground and space-based observatories. And we're doing quite well. We also have many telescopes. Of course, the comparison with an individual Hubble in space is maybe not the best, although it has cost much more than our telescopes. But nonetheless, that's where we are. We deliver data to about 1,000 publications a year, and it's on the increase. In terms of observing proposals, there's a whole process. When the scientists sit down, they have to argue their case very well, why they should get a few hours observing time, and we get about 5 times more proposals than we can actually cater to. So there's quite a competition. And by doing this together, of course, we can do much more than individual countries could do. So this is really the strength of an intergovernmental organization. Also, we try to push the industry to do new things. When you build a new telescope, as you very well know in your field, you call it different things. So we call it observatories with telescopes that each have instruments. So that's 3 layers. You have similar words, but this is the system that we have. When we build a new telescope, of course, it pushes the level of technology to some extreme degree, and we can also feed back into that industrial loop and have the R&D going on out there, and they can earn money on it. They can license things essentially for free. If they do something, they can patent things essentially for free and thereby get those wheels in motion. Of course, it's not a secret that ministers don't pay the money because they love science, right? I mean, you don't get votes from them, they pay because it keeps their industry running. So that's kind of the rationale, short-term thinking in politics. We have expanded when Benoit was at ESO. We were looking at the stars basically in visible wavelengths, so like you wouldn't have done for many hundreds of years. But since then, we've done a lot in radio, and recently also solar physics with radio telescopes, and we are now opening also to cosmic ray physics, which is very different. So it's kind of expanding the scope, which is difficult. We have a lot of cultures, about 45 different nations working together, probably like you also. You're extremely international being in Canada. But we're really we try to hire mainly member states, which is of course also fun, to have this kind of obligation to the member states who pay. On the other hand, you also want the best people, and in the end we end up with 45 different nations and not just the 16 member states. That's how it is. The scientists, they apply for time, they get time. Typically, they actually sit at their home institute and then they just get a link in their email and then they can download their data. Occasionally, they go to the observatories down in Chile and sit with these guys out at the telescopes and work with them if there's something very specific that they need to do. We have about 700 staff members, so that's somewhat more than you guys have, about 4 or 5 more. But we also spread very geographically over offices in Munich, and then in Santiago, and then out at the sites where the 3 observatories are. We've always felt training is a very important part of what we do. We have a very successful fellowship and studentship program. Also in our outreach area, we have done a lot of internships, which is one of the things that really keep the wheels running. Big recommendation to you guys. Interns are great. They get a lot out of it. We get a lot out of it. They're young. We're old. I could keep going like this. You see the picture. So we try to push the young scientists to excel, to get back to their member states and lead research groups there, and by and large that works well. These are the 3 sites. We're down in Chile, southern hemisphere. We're in the northern part of the country. It's very dry there because of the Humboldt current coming up from Antarctica, which you probably know better than I do, but it's cold, meaning precipitation falls in the first 5-10 kilometers where the coastal range comes up. Lots of fog, lovely rain like here, and then inland it's dry as a bone, completely desert, no cities, no light pollution, no animals, also no clouds, which is fantastic, and also the coastal range gives a very laminar flow of the air, so when you have typically west wind coming in, it flows over the mountains and it's very stable air, creating very little flickering of the stars, which is something astronomers hate. 300 nights a year we can observe. Chile has also since now many years, thank goodness, been very politically stable. It wasn't always like this. But, and then the final good reason is down there on the southern part, we can see the 2 Magellanic clouds and the center of the Milky Way very nicely. So this is our first observatory, which was made about 60 years ago. We have 60th anniversary next year. And this is a view of how it looks there when it's nighttime. The starlight basically rains down on these telescopes, looking at the different objects, tracking them on the sky as the Earth moves below. There's the Carina Nebula, a fantastic sight. Our second observatory is Paranal, where we have the 4 big VLT telescopes you can see there, and some smaller ones also. Over the past few years, many smaller ones have come there and been attracted by the incredible skies that we have there. See, I mentioned the flickering, and that's actually our, let's say, our worst enemy on the ground. In reality, no telescope can perform better than a hobby 8-inch telescope about this size, worth 2,000 euros. Because its seeing sets the limit, and that blurring really gives a kind of a show-stopping limit. Now, if we didn't have, let's say, great minds, we would have stopped there, but in reality, you can beat that seeing limit by using some tricks, and these are the tricks we use. We use active optics, meaning that we curve the mirror. When you tilt the telescope, you curve it so it always have a perfect shape. You use adaptive optics, using laser guide stars, probing the atmosphere so you have an artificial star that's twinkling, and then in the optical path, a few hundred times, 1,000 times a second, you can actually correct for that twinkling of the stars. Very clever. I would never have imagined that something like that was possible, but that's why we have fantastic engineers. And then also we use interferometry, which is terribly complicated. I wouldn't even know how to explain it. I probably don't even understand it, but we use the telescopes together over a big area to create, let's say, a very holy mirror, a mirror with great holes in between, but overall much higher resolution than without that. This is a picture of one of the VLTs which has a laser guide star. Now it actually has 4 since this was made. And this is a picture of the VLT observing the center of the Milky Way. I don't know if you read the New York Times article that was 2 days ago. Beautiful article about exactly those observations when they do observe the supermassive black hole in the center of the Milky Way. So I'm almost done with talking about stars and galaxies, because that wasn't quite the reason for being here, but it does set the scene. This is let's say, this science case observing the center of the Milky Way. To start with, we're looking at the sky as you would with your own eyes, and as we're zooming, you will see that we have higher and higher magnification. We have to switch our view to infrared now, because there's so much dust and gas in the center of the Milky Way. That's infrared observations. With that, we can look through the gas and dust. And then we have to click in this adaptive optics with the lasers so that we can remove the seeing limitation that I mentioned. And if we then observe over a period of years, and this has been going on for about 20 years now, we see this. These are stars orbiting something you can't see, and that is the supermassive black hole, 4 million times as heavy as our sun. So, of course, this is cool in itself, but in reality, they can do lots of interesting experiments looking at Einstein's theory of general relativity around this object and test if it works in this kind of an extreme environment, and it does. Everything checks out according to theory, and it works really well when you see these stars orbiting this giant mass. There's a lot of stars there, probably attracted by the big gravity in a kind of a cluster, and they all kind of orbit around that big mass. And just yesterday we published another story where they actually, during these observations, also saw how material was orbiting just around the black hole at the edge of what we call the Schwarzschild radius, the event horizon, if you remember the movies and all this. So that was seen, the material actually going around. Okay, I could talk about this forever, but finishing off here, we have the radio telescopes, ALMA, as they're called, 66 antennas done together with East Asia and North America in Chile at a plateau. It's a fairly flat plateau at 5,000 meters altitude, but surrounded by mountains that are almost 7,000 meters, so an incredible area. We're also building now a 39-meter telescope, so much, much bigger than the 8-meter telescopes up on Serra Amazonas up there. It has been flattened. And down here in the valley, we're just about to sign our first DLT. This is the current status from a few weeks ago. We've been digging into the mountain now and are making the concrete foundations for that giant, giant telescope. 39 meters, so insanely big, and pushing all the technologies to the limit. And down there in the valley, we have the Cherenkov telescope array, which is essentially window pane glass looking for Cherenkov blue flashes from particles coming from, again, black holes and violent events. When they hit the atmosphere, it creates a little flash, and we detect it from different locations with 99 telescopes. Good, so to the core. So why do we have to do science communication? There's no doubt we live in an era of unprecedented scientific progress. Technology actually rules a lot of the stuff we do, but there's also a lot of superstition. People don't know how important science is, how important technology is in our lives, and it's difficult for them to make informed decisions. And we have to somehow bridge that gap in between the scientists, illustrated very nicely by these two chaps. I have permission to show their picture. I'm not mocking them. This is their life. We love them. They do fantastic things, but it's not always understandable by lay people and media. And that's why we're here. We're in between to help this, to stop the brain drain, to support the funding loop, and basically translate a little bit. So, I love astronomy. And in our case, of course, we think astronomy is the coolest thing, right? It's an all-action arena, it's visual, there's always discoveries made, it's fast-moving, it raises these huge philosophical questions. Where do we come from? Where will it end? Did life start on Earth or somewhere else in the universe? What's for dinner? We've been doing this kind of trade for maybe a few decades, but it's still a fairly young thing. Science has existed for many hundreds, if not thousands of years. So we're still kind of catching up and are proving to ourselves, our management, and others that it is a real profession. And I can only emphasize that to you guys. It is a profession, what you do. Scientists cannot do as well as you. You are needed, we are needed. But we also need to be professional and to be professionally funded, which is typically at the level of 1 to 2%. On purpose, I'm not saying what it says on the slide, so you can read, and if you can't multitask, you can have a copy, I can send it over to Benoit, and you can digest it in peace. So it is a question of being professional and having that 1 to 2%. In our case, we're about 1%. I just did the numbers the other day for our visiting committee. Out of a 200 million euro budget, we have 2 million, which is spent about 1.5 on staff and 0.5 million euro on people. Oh, sorry, on services. At ESO, we started in 1985. I wasn't there at the time. It was called Information Service. It had to do with the plate archives and surveys and things like this. It just swung a little bit back and forth. It became PR related, then it became a little bit more international related, and then more like public communication. That's where we are. When I started in 2008, we merged all the efforts that there were, and also we started digitizing, because by then almost nothing was online. You don't have the same issue here, but if you have something that's grown organically through many decades, things like this can be overlooked. And imagine in 2008 not having things online. So that was one of the most important things in the first phase. We then had a big event called the International Year of Astronomy in 2009, and 50th anniversary of ESO in 2012. And then we have, since 2013, been working on what we call the ESO Supernova, which is a museum and planetarium that we got donated on the site at ESO headquarters in Munich. So we have had these kind of bumps on our, let's say, activity curve. Since ESO started back then, about 60 years ago, we have now gotten 24 telescopes that are either operating or are under construction. So like the CTA, the Cherenkov thing, or the ELT, the big 39-meter one. And then dozens of smaller, we call them national telescopes, which do little niche things, but still important things that can lead to Nobel Prizes. We don't know, things that are also often very cheap, and are paid for through some kind of deals with groups, institutes, countries. it's a bit of a challenge having to do so many things. It's a challenge also because our communication landscape is so, let's say, changing. I mean, we live in a sea of change. There's a tide pool of technological change. In Europe, perhaps also a little bit here, we have the issue of translations, right? We need to be able to talk to people. We have 11 or 12 different languages in our member states. The channels are always proliferating, meaning social media. It's always more, never less. MySpace. MySpace is out, right? We also stopped Google Plus about a year ago. We realized that's not worth it. But by and large, it's always more, it's proliferating. We could continue along this line of thinking. The millennials, they must have collaboration. They must have a say in what they do. We can't just feed them communication one way and expect them to be happy and working with us and be brand ambassadors. So this is how it used to be. We used to have the scientists communicating to public information officers, going to the media, and then out to the public via the daily newspaper printed. I still read the printed newspaper, by the way. So I'm a bit of a dinosaur. I get it in my inbox and my mailbox every day. So, yeah, I like that kind of thing. But this is a very different process now. It's going everywhere. Scientists have their own social media channels that's talking directly to the journalists. They send their preprints out. Of course, we hate them for it, but they need to be at the forefront in order to compete with the other groups. So the journalists take things from the preprint, although it hasn't been peer-reviewed, hasn't been properly, say, communicated, and there are no visuals. So it's a very different kind of situation today. We have to follow the latest trends. We have to work with pop culture. We have to engage in unconventional activities. We have to work with commercial entities. That's something we like a lot. Martin, when does that? So social media plays a big role. This is about 10 or 12 years old, that graph, so it's not quite relevant anymore, but it still illustrates that we have a kind of a certain spectrum of activities from formal education and then over media, etc., all the way through to marketing, because of course things are much more complicated now. In our case, we started these first 5 years by trying to build up our own abilities, our own skill sets to become what we had as a lighthouse for science communication. I wouldn't say it has succeeded or not, others can judge that, but at least we had that vision. And as Benoit and I talked about yesterday, having a vision for something is incredibly helpful. Doesn't mean you might achieve it, but having something to strive for gives everyone a certain direction, and that's what we did. And the phase we're in now, we want to make ESO a household science brand. And I know we haven't succeeded because you guys, if Benoit hadn't introduced you to ESO, you'd be like, ESO what? NASA, you know, yes, you might know Hubble, you might know a few other things, but of course it's a big world and we're a fairly small player in comparison to that. CERN you might know, but that's because of the books, right, and the black hole. So, yeah, so particle physics. Yeah. ESO, someday. EPOD, so that's our outreach department. So I think we have some notable firsts, what we've done. Right now, we're probably the only observatory to run a fully fledged planetarium and astronomy museum. I mentioned our digitization efforts, but that also meant that in terms of multimedia, we really went all out. We distributed high resolution broadcast quality HD videos, Ultra HD videos, and now also planetarium shows online, regardless of the size of the files. We embraced the Creative Commons, which is extremely important. I can come back to that if you have any interest. We also operate a content distribution network. It's a little bit less interesting for you because you're maybe more localized here, but because we're serving people worldwide, the latency and packet collision actually they're so disruptive when you go above 1,000 or 2,000 kilometers of distance between the server and the person trying to stream your videos. So we have a very nice contract with a company there. We're producing content in at least a dozen languages, in some cases more. Have a very big media visit and weekend visit operation in Chile. We have about 8,000 people coming to the sites. And also we have been pushing the community very much in terms of standards for how to write metadata for audiovisual products. This is less interesting, just some key facts and numbers about what we do. But our challenge now is that we have this giant 39-meter telescope being built, and that's our biggest asset, and we need to kind of build the brand without diluting the ESO brand. I guess you have the same issue as well. You have the ONC brand, but you also have your various observatories out there which also need visibility in order to get funding. So you have always a kind of dilution of the brands that you have. We have our museum, the ESO Supernova, very limited staffing. ESO only pays $250,000 every year, which is about 1/3 of what we need. Because of the ESO Supernova, we had to change our workflows. We have everything working well in English, our production, but we had to have a complete parallel track of German. And with about 1 or 2 German speakers in the department and none of them doing texts, it was a real challenge having the necessary quality control in a completely different language. I can speak German, but that's not the same as writing German or quality controlling German. So that was an interesting challenge. The ever-changing world is a big challenge for us. The ESO household brand thing, as I alluded to, is something we really need to be better at. Where is your ONC logo in your meeting room? Right? We do the same. It's like, why don't we have some giant logos in all the meeting rooms so that on all pictures you have this big flashy ESO logo? So that's our kind of next challenge. Yeah, so overall it's fantastic. Those of you who know Borat, it's really great. It's fantastic, but it's also the worst of times in some sense. It's never been more challenging. But I like challenges, so I'm literally more a glass half full person, and it's a fantastic kind of work that we do, but it's also very, let's say, interesting and challenging. This is our staffing. We have about 14 people, full-time equivalents, and the distribution is like this. We have about 3 in Chile, 2 and a bit for the ESO Supernova, 2 for audiovisuals, some for web, a little bit for exhibitions, some for publications, that's actually quite big, very little for press. That's too small in my opinion. And then there are some where you have zero photography, community coordination, including social media, 0, distribution, 0, and promotion, 0. And when it's 0, it means that there's no staff. But luckily, we have a very good solution for that. So this is the solution. Staff are orange, and the others are not staff. Obviously, you can't read what it is, but the message is we have been very fortunate to have a ton of volunteers. We work very well with an outsourcing company and have actually been able to retain the same people with that company through almost a decade, I think, in some cases. We work with partners, meaning we have photo ambassadors, just as one example. So we have people out there who are engaging with the brand, who are brand ambassadors, who also deliver assets to us, assets which then go online after sufficient processing and quality control. And that helps the wheels, so you don't rely 100% on the staff necessarily, but by with time you can really build a fairly substantial outreach operation, even with a limited budget. But of course, you need staff to have the coordination, the management, the oversight. The volunteers are mainly for the ESO Supernova because that's simply the easiest way to engage with them. But it's always this balance between what you should insource, what you should outsource, what you should crowdsource, meaning communities deliver things because of their love for the brand, and then volunteering. And if you can create a win-win, of course, for each group in a different way, then you really can get something out of it. We use also crowdsourcing portals. We have a very, very good guy sitting in India doing cosmetic cleaning of our images, and he, half of his time, I think he does fashion shoots, because the surprise, surprised. The pictures of the ladies and guys when they come back from the photo shoot are not very perfect, but they end up being perfect. And we have the same problem with our data. We have instrumental artifacts, little spots and blemishes in the images, and they have to be removed in order to show the real universe. So it's about finding the best talents. Recently I thought about what we do, and I came up with a completely orthogonal way of thinking, and actually we have different roles also. So not looking at the areas in a hierarchical sense or the people, but the roles that we have. So we are a planetarium, we are a museum, we are also an event agency. We have companies coming, paying for doing company events, Christmas lunches. We're a digital agency. We have a shop also, so that's also, and etc. etc. So there are many different kinds of, let's say, identities that we assume. So how do we do it? So in terms of the media and the web and things, it's all about the stories. Good texts, great visuals, good promotion, good distribution. It's no more, no less. But that, of course, it's just a part of it, right? The devil lies in the detail. So how is it really done? And I'm now going to tell you the answer to this question. No, of course I'm not going to do that. That would be too easy, right? But I can tell you a little bit about how we do it. So about 12 or 14 years ago, I had a student, and we looked at something we call the press release visibility scale, and we kind of wrote down, so a given story comes in, what do you then do? Story comes in, and let's say a product comes out or a channel comes out. And we had this thing where we segregate the news production into these layers and then label them. I think you can read it, so I don't have to go into it, but obviously the highest level is when you have the Director General sitting there at the conference exclaiming to the media of the world, we have found the Holy Grail. Right? That's as good as it gets, and it happens maybe once every second, third year or so. Meanwhile, we have even more steps, which is good. It's always more, it's not less. You can quote me on that one. Social media helps us a lot. The scientists, they have good stories. We can't always make press releases, but we can give them a social media post. They can do press releases with their institutes, and then we can help by co-promoting. We have background stories. We have what we call Pictures of the Week, which is a blessing, having a weekly channel for visual material, which is not necessarily high up on the ladder. And also we have what we call announcements, which are web only. So a story comes in, it gets evaluated by news team, and then it ends on one of these tiers in that ladder and comes out. For the press releases, we have about 100 proposals a year, and we evaluate in a very strict sense. And it's amazing how those processes always tend to be diluted, because every case seems to be different, but it's not. Actually, it is really not. So the evaluation is only in two criteria. Is it scientifically frontline, and does it have public appeal? Is it sexy? Is it interesting to the media, to the editor sitting in some newspaper somewhere? You can have other factors, but they kick in afterwards. Do we have time to do it? Would it be politically smart? Is it the Director General's favorite topic? Things like this. And we don't do double refereeing. If the paper says planet around whatever star, the planet was found as far as we're concerned. A later paper may show the opposite. That's fine. We can go back and make a retraction if that's necessary by posting on the web. It happens very rarely because but science moves, it's a living thing, and it's a little bit random walking, as you are very well aware. It doesn't go in a straight line to finding the answers. This is the accumulated curve of what we do at those different tiers. I forgot to mention, but we also do Hubble Space Telescope outreach. That's how Ben and I met when we worked for the Hubble Space Telescope. We retained a contract with the European Space Agency to do that, and a small contract also with something called the International Astronomical Union, mostly known for demoting Pluto about 12 years ago. Yeah, so there is some work with those organizations as well. And the different tiers add up to a sum. I personally believe we're at a plateau now. I thought we were before, but then we opened the ESO supernova, which has its own leads for news items, new film that, new event here, and things of that nature. These are the pictures of the week, which I'm super, I don't know, give me sort of a warm, fuzzy feeling, because it's great to have that picture of the action on the ELT mountain where they're digging, doing concrete. But it's not a press release, and there are many reasons why it couldn't be a press release. And there's no news as such, so it's also not an announcement. It's just a picture of something, some progress, or some scientific stories where it's kind of like, yeah, it's interesting, it's a little bit, maybe not extremely fantastic, but yeah, it's interesting. It might be the best image of this particular object done. Who knows? This is quite technical, but we do track the planning of our news. The blue curve shows the amount of news items in planning. As you can see, it's about 500 at present time now. It's been more or less. There is every year a sharp increase when we roll out the recurring items. We have certain competitions, or Christmas comes every year, so we have an announcement of the Christmas card, such. So that's in a very sort of organized way that it's rolling. And the other colors down here are things that ought to be produced some 3 to 6 months in advance. Pictures of the week or things that don't jump at you, so that we can focus on the science stories, because those are the ones that are really difficult and also come with, let's say, relatively small lead time. This is the number of videos and images, so about 13,000 images and 3,500 videos that are online. And they are in easily accessible archives, as I mentioned. Always the highest resolution is online. We still get questions, can I have it in high resolution? But it's an easy one to answer. It's there, it's possible to take it down and download it. A quick one about our experiments, I think you guys would call it. So these are our telescopes. There are 23 here because we haven't signed the deal with the Cherenkov telescope array. That would be the 24th, as I mentioned. Every one of them have now a web page. It took us, I don't know, 10 years to actually figure out what are the telescopes, what are they actually called, because you'd see in all the engineering documentation 10 different names for a given thing. Lowercase, uppercase, and these are the instruments, as we call it. You can see the elevator bar there, so there are literally 100 plus of those, and we just sort of closed down the work on doing instrument archaeology, figuring out what had been there back in the 60s and 70s. In some cases we don't have pictures of them, but at least we've tried to keep that also for historical interest. And these are, I mean, €1 million instruments, right? It's stuff that actually should have been preserved, but for whatever reason never was. But we have them now, and we're quite thrilled with that. We do our own pictures from the raw data. I think you guys would do the same. In our case, it's a little bit more, let's say, I don't know, it's very satisfactory to do this kind of work and seeing an image of something for the first time nobody's ever laid eyes on. It's like big. It's really an amazing feeling. We do that for ESO and also for the Hubble Space Telescope. So that's a real, let's say, boon to the kind of work that we do. This one's actually never been published, so I shouldn't show that to you. Anyway, it's very pretty. It's a sun-like star which is dying. Its last gasps as it's dying, creating these amazing structures. The reason it looks so complicated is that there are two, and they are doing some kind of a dance, mingling with each other, and then you have this water hose effect of the material being sprayed out in the surrounding medium. And that's what we're made of, by the way. That's how the interstellar medium is filled with stuff that ends up in humans and planets and stuff. We do our own images in a few cases. We have an observing proposal running, but we're not taking time away from the scientists. So we have on purpose made criteria that would not be scientifically useful. So we get time where it's when it's cloudy. Of course, I'm not talking cumulus nimbus with lightning and stuff, right? But cirrus clouds where it's sufficiently bad seeing and bad weather. You can't do photometry because you don't want to have a cloud in part of the picture. But we can still make pretty pictures with that. This is a crowd sourcing effort on Flickr. It's called Your ESO Picture, and people just upload their pictures of ESO on occasion, and you have really cool stuff and occasionally we have some strange image of a dog in front of a telescope or something, but it's all fun and it can be used on social media. Then we have our what we call ESOcasts, and these are sort of the multimedia channel that we maintain. Recently, I think a year or two ago, we started these ESOcast lights because we realized nobody has time to watch a 4-minute ESOcast about some scientific discovery. So here we have a 1-minute thing with just the main visuals from the press release and some of the main messages, the main selling points that we have. So here they looked at a field for a very long time with a particular instrument and found that actually the whole field was covered in a radiation from the distant universe, which is kind of inspiring. And then we have these kind of infographical illustrations of the workings of that instrument. This is a particular instrument which is difficult to explain because it's doing integral field spectroscopy, where you get all the wavelengths at once, so you're doing both an image and a spectrum at once, and you can then pick out the wavelengths as you go. So it's a data cube. So these kinds of illustrations. I'm almost done. I know I'm saturating you with information, but I could talk about this stuff for a very long time. So one important message is, I mentioned 2008, we started digitizing. We also at that point were looking for content management systems. Of course, we looked at off-the-shelf software. And we just hit a wall instantly. When we said, we don't want to be dependent on the file type. They were like, but you can only have JPEG and TIFF and MOV and whatnot. And we were like, yeah, that's fine now, but in 3 or 4 years, it's something different. And what came along? MP4, of course. So that content management system would have been default for a period of a few years until their programmers would have caught up. Also, what was important and a real showstopper for us is we didn't want to be dependent on the file size. So the actual data could not be in a database. Of course, you as scientists have scientific information in databases, and you probably know that problem better than I do. But we don't actually have our images and videos in the database. We point to them, but they are actual files that are on the disk, lying in an open way. And that enables us to distribute files. The biggest one we have is a 600 gigabyte planetarium show, which takes a few days to download even on a fast home link, but people can do it. You can have a download manager, and we don't have to babysit them or send them a hard drive back and forth. We couldn't do that. So we made this thing. I don't even know what to call it because it is a content management system, but it also has a shop module built in as an add-on, or a kiosk system which we use in the ISO Supernova with about 100 different screens showing various types of information, or a customer relations database, and it's all kind of interlinked. And it's of course managed by one person working full-time on this, but for many different paymasters. So for ISO, IAU, and for Hubble. So overall, I think it's good value for money, a big recommendation. This is just a tally of what we do. We distribute about 1 petabyte a year of materials through our content distribution network. We also do print, and this was the point where I would then hand over the book to someone. Is there a librarian present, or someone? No? Then I will hand it to Benoit. It's a book we did for our anniversary, so we were very proud of that. Europe to the Stars.
Thank you.
And exhibitions we have had to cut back on that because we had some rejigging of our European operations because of the ISO Supernova, so we don't do a lot of exhibitions there. In Europe we have all these different nations. Translation is a simple necessity, so we have the ISO member states in blue, and then we translate to other languages. And again, we have a partnership here for this. For once, it's not a free partnership where people just do stuff for us because they like astronomy and stars, but we actually pay 5,000 for each of the member states to people out in institutes or outreach people. We spend about 100,000 a year on this, but we also have all our press releases translated. Every Monday at 11, they have to be done. So We do stuff in Chile, media, public visits, and events, and also we have solar eclipse coming next year. Total solar eclipse right over the sea, which is a fantastic opportunity. Social media is a huge thing. I'm not an expert in that, definitely, but we have a lot of channels, and we try to track them. You can see two very interesting things here. So this is the ESO Instagram. This is the Hubble Space Telescope Instagram, which we just opened. So, right, the one that stops sort of in green there, that's the Google Plus, because it just became stagnant. Very recently, we can see that also Facebook and Twitter have gone a little bit stagnant, and that's because of some changes that they have made on their side, becoming more commercial. We try to learn from the stats. It's very difficult to do evaluation. We also have a shop, we have an online shop and also on the campus. So we produce certain things like books and stuff, but okay, we're not extremely innovative, we could probably do better there. We have about 2,000 orders that we send out every year, and then that includes free orders also, because obviously we have all the events, or if people ask for promotional material, we have a distribution mechanism. It just takes one mail and then it's done. So that's very nice for us. We do some strategic work, also matching the target groups and the channels, data privacy we did recently also. We're focusing on gender balance, it's a very interesting challenge. We have occasionally to do issue management, meaning that we work on nasty stuff, nasty questions from media with the management. And there's a process for us writing a draft, getting it worked on by content owners, and then in the end we send it to the journalist on behalf of the person, typically the Director General. Licensing, I think I've pretty much covered it. I can only recommend having liberal licensing for everything you do in terms of public communication. It helps everyone so much, and it's not that the questions disappear. I still get 5 questions a day or something. Can I use it for X, Y, Z? But still, by and large, 90% of the people, they get it and they use it and put it in books or on the sides of buses or whatnot. Creative Commons is a great way to go forward. We've done a few planetarium shows, which is a very nice way to get the message across. It's also very specific and not so relevant, I think, to you. In terms of production, we have a very uniform process for everything. It turns out that everything we do is you can really boil it down. It always looks like a special case, but it's not. We have about 50 different pipelines. One of them is news, we already talked about, but print is another one, just to give an example. And they go through these different phases: an initiation or brief, production, approval, quality control, if you will, then a publishing, distribution, promotion, archiving, cleanup, and evaluation. Of course, evaluation is hard to find time for, but if we could do it, we'd try. Don't want to go into too much detail, but the pipelines that we have, they are all as, now I really come into the details, sorry, but a few of you might latch onto this. We use Google spreadsheets for this, and it turns out it is a really, really nice way of doing it. We also have just one drive, one filer where all our files are. It's actually not, we have 2, one for videos and one for normal files. Everyone works on those. It's not a problem with version control. We don't have people doing stupid stuff, and we've done this for more than a decade. We have a bug tracker, meaning if we send stuff to web, it's one email. Could we please publish this? So they do what they're great at, and the press person does what he or she is great at. This is our file, not so interesting, but there's about 50 of these different folders, one for press releases, one for images, etc. So one joint calendar. We don't send invitations back and forth. Can we have a meeting here and there? We just have it all in one calendar. So this is the Google spreadsheet. So this is the biggest one we have. 600 items, I think, or 550, whatever I mentioned before. Each of them is a text, and each of the columns is a step in the process. So the first one is the initiation. Should we do this or not? Maybe there is an evaluation. The gray cells is for small items. Very often you don't have to do very much for a picture of the week. And then you just keep track. So the different people coordinating the different types of work can see where they are, even on a Monday morning, tired after a long weekend of partying and whatnot. You see instantly where are you, what needs to be done. Or if you're away, others can sort of help and nudge things along. Green is done, orange is to be done, and then it goes from there. There's a date so you can sort. Okay, in the end, we have the front page, everyone's happy, and yeah, I think that's pretty much the conclusion of, I think, by applying some kind of industrial methods and technologies and thinking and marketing strategies, you can do a lot with outreach and really turn it into a fairly professional operation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lars. It was certainly all-encompassing. Some of you might have questions for Lars. I don't know how we're doing with time. A few minutes, certainly, for questions. Mandy?
Thank you. That was very informative and inspiring and daunting. I'm wondering if you have one main audience or a variety of audiences for your communications work, and if so, how do you divide your audiences?
Yeah, and the many different audiences. Of course, you could look at demographics of lay people and say, okay, some products are for millennials or the younger group, etc., etc. But it goes way beyond that, because you have then press releases which are intended for news media, news journalists. But in reality, it is the one way where you can communicate pretty much to everyone, because it's on the front page of your webpage. So you know you will have the secondary target groups looking in, including scientists, who often think that press releases should be written for them and have the full gory detail. And so I would advise thinking about the target group, but not being too narrow. So you have to find somehow a sweet spot in between. What we do is we layer the information very much. So for press releases, as an example, we have a very, let's say, popular text, a very, very popular headline, grabbing a lead, and then a fairly short popular text, not too many details. But then we have footnotes in there, leading to further explanations. We have hyperlinks. We use Wikipedia a lot. It has very high quality, at least in astronomy for us. Of course, you can find things that are wrong, but by and large, you can go there. You don't have to explain black hole, white dwarf all the time, because it would just also create a hindrance. So we try to layer it, and then having a link to the science paper or somewhere where you have the full scientific information. That does it for us. But it's a very good question. And matching those target groups with the products is a very good one.
Curtis.
Just quickly on social media. I mean, this is very impressive. I'm jealous. I want one of those. But my social media has got two tracks. One is information for people that are interested, and that's always busy. We always get hits. And the other one, we were using Facebook as requests for volunteers. Nobody's monitoring the thing. How do you do your volunteer engagement?
So I don't know if we're very professional in engaging them. We actually have requests from, I think, 200 or 300 people. We only use at the moment 50, and it's mostly people who are on site, who come to us and work with us. And that kind of works. They get something out of it, we get something out of it. But it's hard if you have a very big group of people to give them sufficiently interesting work, but that's also not at a too high level. So that there is, I think, no answer to really how to do that best.
Tom.
Do you actually find much value in the shop that you have?
Well, cash. We get a profit, and that's what we need really badly to run the science museum. So the budget is around 850,000 a year. ESO pays 250. We made a budget, we were capped, and we knew we had to raise funding. So we have these events coming, and we sell things. We have a profit around, I think, 100,000 a year in the shop, which is okay. Given the amount of stuff, and that most of that stuff was there before, I think it's okay. We just make bigger quantities than we would have done without the shop, if you see. So it helps us having, let's say, building a print volume. And as you know, the prices, they drastically taper off for the higher volumes. It's always the first units that cost the most. So in that sense, I think it's valuable. And it helps building some brand awareness, getting that logo out there. And people, they believe it or not, they buy caps with the logo and t-shirts. opportunity there.
Leslie.
Yeah, they love our octopus, so we have great interest in our swag, we call it.
Yeah.
Not that we need a shop here at that scale. But, gee, I'd love to have more time with you to talk strategy as the leader of the communications team here. For 13 years now, I've been with the project. We've been in the water for just over 10, so there's been a lot of great tech stories because, putting it in the water. Now with publications becoming more, we're getting more publications. Where do your stories come from? And do you chase them or do they come to you?
Actually,
because we tend to react as a team and we want to move to be more strategic. I love your workflow, how you decide, it's about timing, it's about what people are talking about, it's the value of the story to whom, how to get your stories. Because we're kind of rounding the 140 or 120 staff room. What's going on? What's the story? So, and then we have international publications now. So.
We're very fortunate that we somehow build enough visibility that the scientists come to us. Well, we probably don't cover everything. On the other hand, we couldn't cope with any more. I mean, that curve was going up, right? So we hit some kind of maximum. So it's a natural process that, okay, it allowed the scientists who get the press releases, not the, let's say, the timid who sits with that nugget of really fantastic stuff, that would be overlooked. Mm-hmm. We looked at, and we did for, I think, a few years, we were scouring the preprint archives, and we probably have the same when we looked at certain keywords. And I don't remember we got much out of it, and it was a lot of work having to actually read all those 1,000 publications, or at least headlines. So I think we're a little bit fortunate in that sense. And with time, maybe that momentum, and if they see they get something out of it, and especially here where the funding loop is so closed, they need that visibility as well. In Europe, it's becoming very much that as well. They're really hungry, especially also with requirements from foundations or the money sources. They require some sort of outreach work. It's become very needed, but I think closing it is a good way.
Dwight.
If you could talk about your customer relations management tool and how you use it.
Are you thinking about data privacy?
No,
okay, because we have about, I think, 50,000 people there, and some are scientists and most are lay people. These are people who have asked me to be subscribers to a newsletter, and then they get that particular newsletter. Could be for the ISO Supernova, there is a newsletter, or the public ISO newsletter, or we have a newsletter for media. It goes out in advance. Also, thanks to our content management system, we can send things out in advance. There's a timing built in a kind of a workflow thing. So a very big thing, very variety of people getting like print products, also annual reports, our calendar that we send out. So they are there, and we just keep track of the returns, try to update and keep that running. The interns are doing that. So simple, basic, imagine one giant Excel sheet, but just in a database.
All right, if there's no more questions, I guess Lars is to leave this afternoon. We'll be busy with our own staff chat later today. So there will probably not be much opportunity for extensive talks after this. However, I would encourage you to exchange business cards, if nothing else. I don't know if Lars, if you came with some.
I probably didn't, but I'm very easy to find Lars at ISO, and I'll leave the talk with Benoit also. So in case you want it, you can have a look. There's too much information for 45 minutes.
Okay, let's thank the speaker again. And hopefully you'll continue to explore BC and you'll come back later for more.
I will. Yeah.
Thank you.
Is that the soul? Sorry? I think this is.
Yeah, and I think I love how you said answer management. How the story strong screen and that tweet. thing.